So can I thank those of you who came to me, to the clerks, who put into our call for views, that really brought home to us some of the challenges that colleagues have been facing, those with disabilities, impairments, extra needs. We were quite shocked at some of the submissions that were put into us as call for views, and actually doing this inquiry on accessibility wasn't necessarily a few months ago one of the things we were going to do, but it was because of the kind of responses that we've had and the sort of shocking nature of some of those experiences that we wanted to have this inquiry. So can I thank you all very much, and thank you for coming today. We're in listening mode. I know I'm speaking now, but we're in listening mode. This is not an adversarial situation. You're free to say whatever you want, and we just want you to feel comfortable and that you're able to express some of the experiences that you've had, and hopefully through this committee, where we can help sort of put some of those right for future colleagues, or for you in your careers as well as we go forward. So to begin with, perhaps each of you could just say a little bit about your experiences and some of the things that you want us as a committee to consider. As someone who's probably here, you were elected before, Marsha, weren't you, Rob?
2010.
Yeah. So maybe we could start with Rob, and then I'll come to Marsha. Sorry, Marsha, did you have?
Yeah. Would it be possible, just for everyone in the room, could you all introduce yourselves?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So we know who's here.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry, I should have thought
fine.
about that. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Lucy Powell, obviously the chair of the Modernisation Committee and leader of the House. Marcus, do you want to start with you over there, nearest to Steve?
Marcus Campbell-Savers from Penrith and Solway.
I'm Jesse Norman from Hereford, South Herefordshire.
Marie Goldman from Chelmsford in Essex.
Chris Almore-Pretend and Porthcawl.
Do you want to say who the clerks? Why don't you say?
Johanna Stalbury, I'm one of the clerks.
And I'm Joanna Dodd, and I'm one of the clerks.
And I've got a big shoes to fill because I'm the new MP, Chris Vince for Harlow.
And my name's Sarah Coombs, I'm the new MP for West Bromwich, and I'm Lucy Powell's PPS.
Brilliant. So Rob, should I start with you maybe about some of your experiences and things you might want to let us know about?
I mean, if I could just start with an anecdote, because I think it sums up quite a lot of the problems. One day I was given a Segway towards the end, the four-wheel
I remember it well.
scooter, which
Yes.
I used to run over a lot of other MPs' toes, including Michael Fabricant's and a few others.
I remember it very well.
But I always wanted to go into the library, but the library door was always shut. And so it was a real hassle, because you then had to ask someone to open the door. And so I said to the guy in the library, and they're all lovely people, I said, well, why can't we just have the doors open? And he said, well, because it's cold in here. And this was always the case. So I said, well, why don't you just get a mobile heater? And then he said, well, we can help you open the door. And I said, I don't want your help. I said, I want to be independent. Why should I have to ask for your help? And I said, even now it makes me, he was a lovely guy, by the way. I don't want any comeback on these people, because they're all lovely people. But that was the attitude, and that is the problem. And I think that sums up, because so much of this stuff can be dealt with, which actually doesn't cost very much money, by leaving doors open, by telling non-disabled people they don't have to use disabled toilets, for example, by making sure lifts work and they're not broken for 6 months on end. I've just found out that Maria's in my old office. Yeah. And you're very lucky. I hope the lift was broken for 6 months at one point. And it's just incredible that this is sort of allowed to go on. So it's not always about you need lots more money. It's about attitudes. And so what I found in this place is it's very Dickensian in the sense that it's the best of times and the worst of times. The best of times in the sense that the individual staff members are, especially the doorkeepers and others, are really helpful and really kind and will do anything to help you. It's the worst of times because of some of the things that I have said, which is just one anecdote of a million. But also that when I arrived in 2010, the whips were very good to me, and I got that office. But I got that office because I happened to know the previous MP who had that office, Lee Scott. So I kind of negotiated with him and the whips. Had I not known who was in there, I wouldn't have even known that there was that office.
It was a ground floor office near a
sort
of
office,
accessible exit.
Just on Speaker's Court, which Marina has. And So, but no one came to me and said, oh, you should have an office that, so on. But once we discussed it with Lee Scott, Lee talked to the whips, then it was all sorted out. The whips were really, really kind. But then for the first, so I got in 2010, it was only in 2017 I read about this article about a Segway, because I didn't want to sit down one because it's bad for me because then I don't use my legs. And there's a stand-up Segway with 4 wheels. I couldn't do the 2-wheel one because you can't balance like going on a roller skate. So I read this article and I think, oh my God, this is incredible. I then speak to the House of Commons authorities. They were brilliant. They got it, that machine, and it literally changed my life. But what that meant was, so from 2010 to it was either 2016 or 2017, I was walking miles around the place, doing in a very bad way. So I was hopping because it was so much walking, which I shouldn't be doing. So of course it was really bad for me for years and years and years. Had I not seen the article in the newspaper, this roller scoot, and then gone to but no one came to me and said, there's an amazing thing called a roller scooter, or did an occupational assessment or whatever it is. If I ever asked for anything like a chair or something, they would be very helpful, but it was always me asking for something, and I tried not to because I was also wanted to be independent and not be just, asking for anything and everything. So a lot of this, it seems to have changed a fair bit since then, but I think the experiences were very bad. I know we're going to come on to voting and all this sort of thing, so I don't know if I'll save myself for that. But I think, of course, things need to be dealt with, like slopes where there are steps, and doors that are too heavy to open, and doors through the lobby should be open at all times, and things like that. But I go back to my fundamental principle. This is not always about spending millions of pounds. This is about attitudes, and it's actually, some of it is very simple to change, but in order to change, you need to have the right attitude to change it in the first place.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. We just in that meantime, we just for others, we've been joined by Paulette Hamilton, who's sitting next to Sarah Coombs on this side. Perhaps Marsha, you might come in next, because obviously you've also been here for longer, but also you've had time at the dispatch box and on the front bench and got some other experience from that too. Yeah.
Okay. Well, firstly, thank you for asking me to be here. Just in case anyone doesn't know me, it's Marsha de Cordova, MP for Battersea, and I was first elected in 2017. My condition, I have nystagmus, which is an involuntary movement of the eye, which causes me to be severely short-sighted, and I'm registered severely sight-impaired, blind. So when I first got elected in 2017...
Remember it? Well.
The whips called me. It was Mark Tarmy that called me, and he wanted me to come in a day or so as soon as I possibly could, so that they could make sure they get me positioned in a really good place. So when I got here, a lady called Fiona Channing met me and took me to show me a few offices in the palace that would enable me to be quite central in terms of where all the activity goes on, so things like the chamber, the library and other spaces. And so that was, I believe, a really good start to things. However, as has already been highlighted, I feel that this infrastructure, this building, we know it was built hundreds of years ago, so it hasn't been built with accessibility in mind. And I choose to say, as a committee, the starting point should be looking at what the social model of disability means, in terms of, it's not us here giving evidence, it essentially is the societal barriers that create the challenges. And if we can break some of those down, then obviously we'll help to, as Robert says, change attitudes. But then I think you'll be changing lives and experiences of members of Parliament and staff, and also those that visit the estate as well. So when I was thinking about today, I thought about the building. So there were many, many challenges with the building and the way it is, particularly the difficulties with lighting. I mean, even in this room, the lighting isn't great, but no. Throughout the whole estate, particularly the walkway between the palace and PCH, we need good lighting there. It's really dark, and in the winter months, that becomes a real challenge for people. And then we think about the doors. In PCH, for example, we have lots of glass doors everywhere. And for somebody who's visually impaired, you're not able to really see where the handles are, where the doors are. So I asked for some markings to be put on the doors coloured markings, but they chose to put grey markings on the doors as opposed to maybe green or another fluorescent colour. So these are small things that could be steps that could be taken to just improve my experience.
Sorry.
That's okay.
It's not me, it's the dog, honestly.
Dennis, come in. I thought it was Stephen touching the leg, but it's the dog.
I'm sorry.
Thank goodness for that.
I'm sorry. But also things like steps, making sure we've got, some fluorescent markings or some sort of delineation on the steps that would just make it easier for anybody using them. For example, between PCH and 1 Parliament Street, there are some markings on those steps, but nowhere else do those steps exist in Westminster Hall or anywhere in the Palace. And the same would go for some of the escalators as well, making sure we have some markings on those steps. So I think just making the building a little easier. We don't have to do huge amounts of changes, but I feel as though some of those small steps that could be taken could really help.
Yeah.
When you enter the building, things like the turnstile doors, again, I struggle to use those turnstile doors, so I always have to ask somebody to open the door for me. So just getting into the building is a challenge. I just can't walk in myself. I have to get somebody to open a door for me, and I get questioned all the time. Why do you need me to open the door? Well, because I can't use the turnstile. So it's just some of those small tweaks. If we can get the House to kind of recognise some of the challenges, and then obviously the solution would be just, have another door, potentially. It doesn't have to be those kinds of turnstile doors that will, prevent me from being able to use them. The lifts, so we have lifts here, we have lifts in PCH and other places. So I think the lifts should definitely have audio in them. They all don't. So that they can announce the floor you're on. I think we should have better markings in the lifts as well. So you can have brow markings or bump-ons just to make it slightly easier for people to use the lifts. And that would help not just members, but it would help everyone. We need proper signage. The signage around here, like coming to committee room 15, it's only because my office is literally outside that I know that this is 15, but it's very difficult to identify which committee room you're going into. And so I think we need to have good signage across the whole of the parliamentary estate. That goes for the committee rooms and the meeting rooms across in PCH as well. It's just, it will give you the room, but imagine if that was in bigger fonts or potentially using a yellow background with black letters or something, but just to make it more obvious where people are. Now, I know we're going to come on to things like the lobby, the chamber. I mean, I can talk about the chamber now, if that's helpful.
I think we'll come on to that maybe.
Yeah, okay.
Is that...
That's fine, because I can talk about voting.
Definitely,
and
there's a whole throng of stuff on
there's
that.
a whole throng, and what I would say as well is, when we think about the services, so the different services that are provided to members, staff and visitors as well, our places to eat, they're not the most inclusive spaces in terms of being able to identify menus and stuff like that. And obviously, if you go to Dispatch, is it Dispatch over in PCH where you get coffees?
Yeah.
And things like, it's such a hassle for me to have to, they won't pour your milk for you. So you've got to carry the hot cup over to the other side. Again, navigating that, I have to ask somebody to do it for me, which I should be able to just get it done there and there. So I think those are just small things that could really help, essentially. But yeah, I'll stop there.
No, do you know what? It's so interesting, to see these things through your eyes. Well, it's wrong analogy there. But you know what I mean? Yeah. It's like the small things that could make a really big difference. And just for everybody's purposes, we've been joined by Sarah Owen, who's the chair of the Women and Equality Select Committee, and she's guesting this today, because how this committee works is that we're working with the relevant sort of committee of the House as well, and obviously Sarah's committee put in a strong submission to us about a number of these issues. Marie, do you want to go next? Because you gave us some really powerful testimony that actually made us realise we had to do this inquiry.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate that. I'm immensely proud that we, along with other colleagues, have now set up the first ever Disability Parliamentary Labour Party grouping in Parliament. And so some of the contributions that I'm going to make today is based on two sessions that we had with clerks alongside those colleagues. So this is not just my evidence, it's their evidence. And I've asked them to also send through any additional points today, which I'll be drawing on throughout the session. I just wanted to pick up on one of the things that Marsha said, which was to talk about the social model of disability. My strong advice in approaching this and the input from us today is to do it strategically by thinking about barrier removal for disabled members across the pathway through which we would navigate this space during a normal working day. So as you'll be aware, I went on and took one of the staff from the Restoration and Renewal Committee on an ad hoc accessibility audit and walked them through from PCH all the way through to the chamber and then up to the committee room, so that I could demonstrate to them where all the barriers are at each physical barriers at each point, and then also talk through some of the other barriers. And I would really recommend that that's how you approach it, both in terms of the physical barriers, but also in terms of the procedural barriers in those spaces where disabled members will want to contribute and make sure that they have a strong voice. And that's really important because obviously under the Equality Act that was passed in the chamber in this house back in 2010, there is an anticipatory duty. So with the greatest respect, a lot of these things should have been done 15 years ago, and it's brilliant that it's now being caught up with, but I cannot emphasize enough that where these points are being made by us collectively today, they should have been done before. Absolutely. And so where people might be pushing back on some of these things, these are reasonable adjustments that make this house much more inclusive and ensure that we create a space where a generation of disabled people can come and follow us and make sure that we better reflect the representation of disabled people across our population, which is around 22% of the voting age population. So just an anecdote from my experience. So I want to say a really positive thing to start with. So the really positive thing is that the House staff, almost at the moment I got elected on, I think, the Saturday, contacted me and asked me what my needs would be and what kind of support I might need, given that I wouldn't yet have recruited staff. Similarly, the whips. So I'm extremely grateful for both sets and groups of people. It was really an example of good practice, and having worked in lots of organisations, that doesn't happen very often. And then the House staff made sure that they, one of their own staff members worked with me to have the role of sort of a PA during those first few weeks when I didn't have any staff, and that made like a huge difference in terms of my ability to feel included here and access things. And the whips worked at top speed to make sure that I got an accessible office. I'm very grateful that I've now inherited Robert's office, and that just made a massive difference. And they're examples of discretionary effort that was very much appreciated by me, and examples of good practice. The next anecdote, before I go through some of the other stuff more systematically, is when I made my maiden speech. Now, we had already told everybody of the kind of reasonable adjustments that I'd need, that because I wear a prosthetic limb, sitting on a bench that was designed for very tall men is not the most accessible thing for a very long period of time, and have a lot of pain most of the time, but it's particularly triggered when I'm having to sit in a certain position for an extended period. Despite having told the speaker that and various people that, I still had to wait 4 hours to be called to do my maiden speech in the debate, really? Ironically, the Employment Rights Bill debate. So and by the end of it, I was just feeling exhausted. I didn't know when I could get up and use the bathroom or go and have something to drink or, just have something to eat so that I could get my energy levels up again. And, that was like a big deal to make that speech, as it is for every new parliamentarian. Yeah. And so it was something that just kind of lost the edge because I couldn't enjoy it because I was just so tired. And there was no need for that to happen. There was about 4 other Labour MPs that were giving their maiden speeches in the same session before me. And so I could easily have been called at an earlier point in that session. And I think that the key there is to go, well, we have another house in this chamber, and having had conversations with members of the Lords, it's clear to me that they are eons ahead of where we are in the Commons.
We're hearing from them soon, actually.
Yeah, and I know that this was something that came out in our Disability PLP, but my kind of second big recommendation after, making sure that you're looking systematically across the pathways of how we use this space is to compare like for like what is currently provided in the Lords and at least reflect that in what is then provided in the Commons. So in some circumstances, and I appreciate we're going to come back to voting, so I won't go into much detail at this point, there is the opportunity for remote voting. I think the third recommendation, just sort of as a general point that I would make, and I appreciate that I've made this at separate times to you, Lucy, but there is an international federation of electoral systems which has done a really good piece of work on how to make those electoral systems and places of government more accessible for disabled people. I, again, would make sure that colleagues that are putting the report together at the end look systematically through their recommendations or any work that they've done and international examples of good practice around making parliaments more accessible for disabled people, because we are the mother of all parliaments. We should be the best and we should lead from the front, but where we can learn from other places, we should do. The other two kind of general points that I want to make, because I appreciate we're going to come back to some of the issues in more detail around the accessibility of the chamber and voting, is first of all that I was very grateful again to the House staff for making sure that when I was sworn in, there was some of us, and had the pleasure of doing this alongside Stephen, rather than queuing for a long time, they did a special session for myself and a couple of other members so that we didn't have to queue to be sworn in. And they really thought through what we would need to make that more accessible. Again, that was this place doing reasonable adjustments at its very best. And that worked really, really well for me, and I really appreciated that, because it took a huge amount of stress out of that proceeding. The other example, just to headline some of the things around voting, was at some point before Christmas, where we had 10 votes in a row. And physically, for lots of the disability PLP colleagues, including myself, that was extremely demanding when it's 20 minutes a vote, when you're walking round and round and round. And it also meant that for those of us that live in constituencies a long way away, we couldn't get trains until very late. Ordinarily, our staff would have finished by then. I can't travel to the train station with all my belongings to go home on my own. I need someone else to take those possessions with me. So the lateness of votes on the last main sitting day of the week has a big knock-on effect, not only to us as members, but to our staff, and in terms of safety, because that meant that you're potentially travelling quite late on a train where you're a member on your own, and that also puts us at risk. So I think that there are elements of this which is not just about reasonable adjustments, it's about looking at the staff support that disabled members need to do this job well, and also safety considerations around being a disabled member. I'm keen to come back to some of the other things in detail, but I'll leave it there because I know you want to bring other people in.
Thank you, that's really enlightening. Thanks so much, Marie. Steve, shall I come to you next?
Yep, that'd be great. So I'm Steve Darling, I'm a Member of Parliament for Torbay. I have a form of macular degeneration called Stargardt's. That means I can sometimes hallucinate without the need for drugs. So my world is a bit like looking through frosted glass with a kaleidoscope play at the same time. And I have a guide dog called Jenny, and I slightly hesitate to say that the Liberal Democrat Whip's office rang me a week before the general election last end of May and said, "We think you might win, Steve. So what reasonable adjustments should be made for you?" And I was really pleased they were kind enough to arrange a meeting with myself and David Blunkett so he could share his world with me within a week of coming here.
Just for the record, actually, Wendy Chamberlain has just joined the panel as well. We were just introducing people. So.
And also, it's
yes,
really,
yeah.
But also, when we did the descriptives, which was really spot on, it's really helpful if you do a little audio description of what yourself is, what you look like as well, because we haven't got a clue. But anyway,
well, I'm gorgeous.
well, everybody to me looks as if they're 16 anyway. But moving on. So the thing that I reflect to myself is there are 650 parliamentarians. However, we have 7,500 staff working on the estate, and we are kind of apex people. And so if things can't be done for us, what hope is there for the rest of those who help make this place tick. So as others have alluded to, doorkeepers are men and women with wings tucked underneath their jackets. They are angels. They're really good. The vast IT staff, committee clerks, etc., are outstanding. The dining, a couple of times I've gone in and used the dining facilities, sit-down dining facilities. They are incredibly helpful, making sure that the table that I have where Jenny is on the edge of the room, so that Jenny's got can go up against a wall or something like that. Really helpful. Reading menus, things like that. I think some of our cafeteria staff, I think could probably do with a little bit of support, and I think it is just equality and diversity training, making sure that all staff have that as a given, and letting them know that talking through people what you're doing is always helpful, because then you know that they're actually acting upon your requests. So that's really helpful. I would echo what's been said so far about signage. I think the challenge that we face as parliamentarians is that we do have members of staff, often as a support worker, wandering around with us, so the world is so much easier for us. But for other members of staff, where apart from the smell, it can be a bit difficult to work out where the loos are. And also the numbering here on this corridor, I would echo what was said around, where there are glazed doors and things like that. So I will keep away from the chamber, because I understand we're going to touch on that a little later on. We did have an issue, and Wendy as Chief Whip did help us out with some support in a committee room, and the fact that I would need a support worker even when it was a private session, and honestly my staff can be trusted, so that was disappointing that we did have to, they made the right adjustments fairly swiftly, but we shouldn't have to push on that agenda. To be fair, when we've had presentations, they're now looking at getting a monitor for me so that I can at least get a sense of what's being put before us. So that's extremely helpful. So there is mostly positive moves in that direction, but there are some real challenges there before us. And I would echo what colleagues have said around that social model, and using that as the starting point would be extremely helpful. But it does worry me that do we have institutionalised challenges around disability, when I, as an elected member, write to the DWP in a written question saying, when are you going to publish the green paper around benefits reform in an accessible format? And I get they come back and say it'll be with you in due course. And it is why so to me it is about that culture change that we need to see within the organisation is extremely important. And I do have more to feed back around the chamber, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Steve. Yeah, we're going to come on to sort of voting, the chamber procedures and things shortly. Sarah, do you want to add anything?
Yes.
You've got slightly different experiences.
Yes, yeah. So I've got sort of a hidden disability in that I'm type 1 diabetic, and I only got this 3.5 years ago, so I'm a late diagnosis, but luckily Mr. Speaker is also type 1, which is good because there's a little bit of understanding. But essentially what that means for anyone is that I have to control my blood sugars using insulin. So we can literally just have ups and downs throughout the day. So basically access to food and sort of thing, that's the key thing that is one of the impacts. And I would agree, like, with the doorkeepers were absolutely fantastic. As soon as they knew I was type 1, the first day they got a fridge in the reason room for me in case I wanted to put insulin in. And I thought that went above and beyond because I didn't ask for that, and that was fabulous that they did that. But I would say, much to what Marie was saying, the difficulty only with type 1 or any other condition, a bit like with Crohn's, or I've got a colleague also who had a stomach cancer years ago, is the period of time that you can wait for a debate. Now, I'm not calling for call lists because I do understand it's a part of the debating chamber and I like that side of it. But my difficulty is, and I was sat in a debate for 5 hours the other day waiting, and if I haven't, and especially on a Monday night, if you start at say at 5, I was there until 9, my blood sugars I could see were dipping and dipping, and I was taking sweets, but I didn't want to leave the chamber because I'd been told through an admin error they'd forgotten my name, so they said they'd put me up the list, so I daren't leave in case I then missed my slot. But by the time I got to occasionally bobbing and doing it, I felt quite ill. But I did it anyway, because you put the smile on your face and you do it, don't you? But talking to a few colleagues, for us, that's probably the hardest part, is just knowing a little bit more certainty, if possible, about when we could be called. That would help, because even physically bobbing, that's burning energy. And when your blood sugars, your insulin's eating away at the only reserves you've got, extra exercise makes that a bit more of a challenge. Because what happens is when you have a low blood sugar, essentially you get very hot, sweaty, you can pass out, worst case scenario. And once you've had sugar, whilst your body can recover, your body recovers within 10 minutes of having sugar, but your brain takes about 45 minutes to get back properly if it's been a low. So you just feel a little bit disorientated. So you're not on your best, really. Likewise, if you have a very high blood sugar, which mine's a bit higher, you get very thirsty. So you can't really win. So you don't want to drink too much, because then you might have to dot out again. So it's just some of the practicalities. And I think for me as well, it's just appreciation of tech. So and like not all type 1s have it, but I wear a sensor and I wear a pump, and occasionally it will send off a little alert noises. So sometimes I scare people because they don't know why things are going off. But I mean, a few more access to charging points would be great, actually, closer to the chamber, because if you're there for a couple of hours, I mean, I can't be more than 6 meters away from this phone, because otherwise it will sound off an alarm because it thinks I'm in trouble or dead, which I'm not. But again, it's just, you've been running around for the day, you don't have a charger pack with you. Little things like that, I think, would help. But I think we'll come on to more things. But particularly, I was speaking to someone whose wife had Crohn's and colitis, where they were saying, for them, for example, having flare-ups, if you do, you just need access to loos with a good amount of space. Now, I know that will come into part of the restoration, but it's just some of the more practical sides for us. So, yeah.
No, I've actually just recently lobbied successfully for more ladies' loos near the chamber,
good, yes,
so they'll be coming soon, I'm hoping. But anyway, we could have a whole other session on that. Can I thank all of you? I think that was really, really enlightening and very helpful indeed, and given us a number of things to think about. So I'm going to come to Sarah Coombs next, who is particularly interested. And just to say, one of our other kind of an inquiry as piece of work we're doing is around certainty as well. And I think trying to provide members with a bit more certainty in the day and the week. And I think actually coming out of this inquiry will help shape that, or vice versa anyway. And the two are obviously related. But I know that's Sarah's hot topic too.
Yeah, I think those were really powerful testimonies about just kind of the experience of being in the chamber and how it all works. And so I was just interested to hear a bit more about, again, this issue about the length of time, and probably very few other workplaces would you be asked to sit in one place for 5 or 6 hours with not a clear indication of when you could leave. So a bit more on that. Also, of course, we've got a bobbing process here, which is where you indicate you want to speak. Any kind of particular thoughts on that? And, just overall how for future disabled members we could make adaptations in the chamber, either physical or procedural, which could make it more accessible overall.
Who wants to come in first on that? Yeah, Marie?
So that's really helpful. So in terms of bobbing, this was the main thing that's come through again from colleagues that are part of the Disability Parliamentary Labour Party. The physical exhaustion of that, I mean, for me, you feel like you've had a real core workout, and it is really, really tiring after a while. For colleagues that have long-term arthritis, it's really painful. For those that have other conditions, I mean, you spoke so eloquently about the impact as someone with diabetes, but sustaining that for hours and hours and hours is just physically really exhausting. And so having another way that you could maybe indicate, and the speaker, when I've had conversations with him, has been very, very generous and said, you could raise something. But I think also there's, it's sometimes hard to keep track of things. And for some groups that have got maybe autism or SPLD, that's hard to kind of follow when you need to keep doing that. So I actually am of the view that having, as they do in the Lords, a sense of when you're going to be called on the list is a really good thing, because then you could indicate, if you know that you're going to be after a certain number of speakers or an individual speaker, then you can indicate just before. But I think, if you've told the speaker you want to speak, the assumption should be that you want to speak. You don't need to then go back and say, I need to speak, unless you've just changed your mind for whatever reason and pull out of the debate. So I think having an idea, 3 or 4, and a bit of a clear pattern of you need to be in the chamber, and 3 or 4 speakers or 4 or 5 speakers before you speak is absolutely right. I think I would want this committee to hear loudly, as disabled members, we want to participate in the chamber, we want to participate in Westminster Hall debates, but to expect us to only get to speak if you're prepared to sit in a chamber for up to 6 hours is not an accessible and inclusive parliament. And that should be heard very loud and clearly. I think there are other ways that you could do that. So we've spoken about bobbing. I think call list is a good idea. I want to be required to listen to my other parliamentary colleagues, but I want that to be a sort of reasonable amount of time so that I can go in and out and there's a predictability there, so that that's not stressful. And I think also for disabled members, we all work long hours, we get that that's part of the job, but actually fitting in your constituency requirements, perhaps your bill committee requirements, as someone who's just done pretty much 17 weeks straight on bill committees, I've not been in the chamber or been able to be in the chamber as much as I like. And partly I kind of say to myself, well, I can't sit there for 6 hours because I've got these other commitments. So I think there's another aspect that, you know, a lot, quite rightly, is this expected of us by our constituents and by the public. And this is about making sure the chamber synthesises with the modern expectations of what members should be doing for their constituents to serve them here well. And I think not knowing when you're going to be called in a 6-hour period of time doesn't achieve that in terms of good practice either. The other aspect, I think, is the visuals. So knowing when you're in the chamber, the enunciators, the screens for a lot of members that might have sight impairments, even wearing glasses, are quite hard to see. I think it would be useful to make sure that the speaker is enunciating possibly more often, like thank you to the member for, because often as the next speaker you want to be able to refer to the constituency, but if you can't see the enunciator and you've not heard the speaker call the name, because they call the name but not the constituency, and then you want to be able to refer to them, that's really hard and off-putting. So actually makes it harder for disabled members to make interventions and undermines the richness of debate. I think the other key point for me in thinking about what could be possible is splitting up session times as well, so that at the moment we load all the questions, urgent questions, questions for ministers, right from the beginning, and then debates get pushed and pushed back, so they become later and later and later. Now, I've found questions a really valuable part of serving my constituents, but I think that there could be a way where if you, instead of having a 6-hour debate in one block, you could have it in 2 sessions and put your name down and then have the questions interspersing, you know, if it's a ministerial question, have that just before the first half of the debate session, and then have questions to urgent questions, like have a block period between a certain time when that is, and then you've got the second half of the debate. And then that would mean that the times for the votes don't get pushed back so late. And so I think there could be that, and that would help a lot of people to be in the chamber more. Like, I want to be in the chamber more, not less, but the way that it's structured at the moment, it excludes me from being able to be in the chamber as much as I'd want to be. Just in terms of votes, because colleagues raised a lot, in terms of other observations about the chamber, colleagues did talk about how difficult it was to access water and to sit comfortably, and being able to, there is a bit of a variety across speakers in terms of whether you're able to go out and get water or get food, and so that needs to just be standardised a bit more and make sure the culture in terms of the different speakers are enabling disabled members to do that, rather than it being a bit ad hoc depending on who is chairing the session. And that one of the other things that we talked about at length in the Disability PLP was guidance agreed with the Speaker and Deputy Speaker in terms of reasonable adjustments being made for MPs. So there's a really fine balance. Some colleagues wouldn't necessarily want to declare what their disability is, but others just get extremely exhausted having to retell their experience and their story to every different person, be it the House staff, be it the Speaker that's on duty that day. And so just having, for those MPs that would like that, a centralised repository of here are the reasonable adjustments for this particular member, because having to retell that again and again is extremely tiring. Another thing that was raised that relates to the chamber was the use of prayer cards. Now, I didn't tell this anecdote at the beginning, but perhaps now is a good point. When I first started, the doorkeepers were lovely, and they said, "It's fine. We'll you work out where's going to be good for you, and we'll put in a select committee, like a pink select committee card, rather than a prayer card to reserve the seat." And I was like, "Okay, fine." But then after a while, they said, "You are going to have to sometimes come in for prayers, because they are prayer cards, and we only put that in for people that are at select committees. But when you're keeping on use them, you are actually going to have to come in for the start of the session." And I was like, well, there's a whole load of things here about the intersection of different protected characteristics under the Equality Act coming up against each other. It may be that my beliefs mean I don't want to, and that will be the case for some members, to be present for prayers in order to get access to the reasonable adjustment that I require as a disabled person. I think that is beginning because quite a few of us have spoken to different colleagues and the speaker's been great. I think that has shifted, and I've certainly not since been asked to make sure that I'm at prayers in order to be able to get an accessible seat for me. But I think the message should go back that we need that institutional memory to record the fact that some people will need certain seats as a proper reasonable adjustment, and being able to sit in certain seats. We did talk about whether we ought to have reasonable adjustment cards instead of prayer cards, but I think there was, because certainly some non-disabled colleagues had articulated a sense of frustration as a result of members sitting in their seat. And so that might need to be something that's looked at, so that there's maybe a gold card, which is, it says the person's name, and it doesn't need to say on it, this is a reasonable adjustment card, but there is an understanding that there's very good reasons, and the member didn't need to explain why that is. Unless you want me to talk about voting now,
no,
I will leave it there in terms of the chamber.
Because I think we've probably veered onto quite a few other things, because it was sort of a bit narrower than just the chamber, but that's totally fine. I mean, Rob, you were a sort of slightly different era, and I know bobbing you sort of struggled with.
I had an agreement with John Burko that I could waive an order paper in the end.
Yeah.
Now, the only issue was if there were tall MPs sitting in front, you had to kind of lean forward or hope that he would call the taller MPs first, so the speaker would see. But on the whole, it worked. But I appreciate that's not possible for everyone, and I don't know whether there could, given that it's the clerk or whoever the person stands next to the speaker is called, whether or not they would have an app. You could have an app where somebody has a disability that they press an app, and then the person next to the speaker can tell the speaker that, because the issue isn't just about debates, it's also about urgent questions and statements. So what you're saying wouldn't work for urgent questions and statements, and so you need to solve that issue. And if it's a really big urgent question or statement, there's going to be a lot of people who want to stand, and then if you have a disability, you're unlikely to get called because of all the other.
I remember you being obscured sometimes when you were at the back.
Exactly. On the call lists, I've never understood why we don't have call lists. Yeah. We had it during COVID. Did the world come to an end? Of course it didn't. It's just ridiculous. And yes, you should stay.
There is a call list. It's just that nobody else knows about it.
Yeah, but I don't know why the MP isn't told. I mean, yes, you should come in and hear the opening. I have no problem with that. But then you should come in, because of the pressures on a modern MP are so huge. Why on earth you have to sit there for 5 or 6 hours? It's ridiculous. So I ended up, when I was in my times between being a minister and backbencher, if I was a backbencher, I stopped doing big debates. I didn't want to sit there for 5 hours, and I would just intervene on the first speaker. So I would get my intervention. Chris, this isn't going back to your Harlow newspaper, I hope.
Robert is similar, mate.
So that's the way I would do it, because I just didn't want to sit there for 4 hours and be tired and stiff and not be able to do my work, and then go back tired and all this kind of thing. So that has got to change. It's the most ridiculous. As I said, we did it in COVID. What? Who did the world come to an end? No, it didn't.
No, I think. Well, look, I think we've discussed this as a committee, and it's definitely something we'll discuss again. I mean, obviously in COVID it was designed to keep people out of the chamber, and I think it's a kind of version that's designed to kind of make sure the chamber is busy and full, but kind of absolutely meets those things. And I, couldn't agree more with you on what you saying there. Yeah, Sarah and Marsha, and then I'm going to bring Chris in.
I was just going to say with that, I think, as you're right, I think you should definitely go in the beginning. I actually, even if it was like maybe a 1 or 2 hour window, even if it's just slimmed down, or for me, if it was on a Monday night, they gave an indication, you'll probably be in the first, but not the second. Even if they don't want to tell me the order, just an indication would help. Because I actually think the problem is that it is supposed to be a debating chamber, and I think the problem is if we're too prescriptive on you're going to be at this time. I know it works, as you say, during COVID, but my fear is that at the moment people don't necessarily listen to each other. I still want us to be able to have that to and fro, and I think that's the importance of the dynamic of the chamber itself. So I don't want to lose that, because otherwise it just becomes everyone's going in for a social media clip, not for what we're here.
Anyway.
But I also take the point that it doesn't look good for the public when if you're in there for 3 or 4 hours and everyone's on their phones because actually they've checked out. That doesn't look good either. So it's just that fine balance which keeps some of the traditions of the chamber alive, which I actually personally love. And when I can bob, I quite like it. It keeps you awake. But equally, I understand physically it's very difficult on other times. So it's that sort of fine balance, I think.
Marsha?
Yeah, so just on the bobbing thing, when I first got here, I was told you have to catch the speaker's eye, which just made me laugh because I thought, well, that's just not going to be possible under the former speaker and the current speaker. So currently, if I'm on the back bench, if I'm in the chamber, I just bob in the hope, because if it's busy, like it has been recently, that the speaker sees me, and I have no idea. So getting an idea and understanding as to when somebody could be called for a debate or in an urgent question, or even at departmental questions, you kind of get an idea when you're going to be called, I think is useful. Just on the chamber in terms of it being an accessible space. Now, when we speak about the enunciators, now they're quite high up, so the suggestion could be larger screens or in any way having some sort of portable enunciator that you could that a member could pick up and have with them, because when you're in a debate you do want to acknowledge the previous speaker. Knowing their constituency is really important, especially if you've got to learn how to pronounce it. But also timing. Now what I have to do if I'm waiting, I have to say to the person next to me, let me know when it's 1 minute, then it's 20 seconds, so I can then wrap up. That shouldn't be the case. It should be that, you know, if I've got a portable enunciator, I can just look down and see how long that I have left to speak. So I think we need to have some sort of portable enunciator. If they've got them on large screens, they can certainly have it on some sort of iPad that colleagues can then just pick up and have with them. On the seating situation, again, I have to put in the pink prayer card, and I tend to only do that for PMQs on a Wednesday because I'm not sure if what my day is going to look like, because we're all very busy. But if we want to get to the chamber, it's challenging all the rest of it. But I think having some sort of, I don't want to say allocated seating because that's unfair to colleagues, but having some sort of card that if we're going to be in the chamber, we can put it in and know that that's where we're going to sit. I sit on that back bench in particular because it's got a brighter light. Of all the lights in the chamber, this one area has a brighter light, and that's why I choose to sit there, so that I can read my notes or whatever. So that's important. When I've been on the front bench and speaking at the dispatch box, now I've had to try several different methods. So I adopted the Gordon Brown method by stacking books on the dispatch box. That didn't work for me. So eventually, and the whips will remember this, especially Mark, we tried having different forms of stands, and we eventually settled on the music stand, which worked. Sometimes didn't balance particularly well, but again, as with all of us, we have coping mechanisms, so we just kind of adapt our approach and things like that. But having some sort of translucent stand for anybody that needs to be on the dispatch box, if they have a sight impairment, would be useful. What I will say as a positive as well is, I get all my papers in large print, so there's the voter force, they always have the large print order papers and all the papers, and initially there were a few challenges, but now it works like clockwork, and that is great. So that's it on the chambers. But I think with the enunciators, just one final point I will say, enunciators are darted around the whole of the estate, and they're quite high up. If we could have something a little bit lower down, so that, on a larger screen. So for instance, when you go in the lifts in PCH, they've got some halfway down, and I'm able to actually read those. But when they're high up, I certainly can't. So it would be great if we could get a few lower down.
Okay, great. I've just got Sarah, Owen and Wendy who have been stimulated by some of that. Sarah.
Thank you so much, Chair. And apologies, I missed the first part. My committee was still sitting, so I've come straight from that. Thank you all for your your insightful evidence and experience. It really is very helpful and very valuable and important indeed. Marsha and Marie, I wanted to come back to you a bit on this. Marsha, you said it was unfair to your colleagues to have a specific seat. Why is it unfair?
Because you want to, I say that in the context of you don't want to feel like you're being given special treatment as a disabled person. And that's where it comes from. You just want to feel as though, you know, we all should be on an equal footing in the chamber, but, you know, that is where it comes from. You don't want to feel as though you're getting special treatment.
We have there's 292 seats in the chamber.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, if the chamber was completely accessible, then it wouldn't be a special treatment. But the fact that it isn't accessible, it's an adjustment.
Just to say, when my seat where I used to sit, as you will remember, right at the back, when I was a backbencher, initially I marked it like a lion. So I went there every single day, even when there was nothing going on in the House of Commons, but just so everybody would know that was my seat. And after about a year, or maybe a bit longer, everybody knew it was my seat, and nobody put a prayer card there. So even I then didn't have to worry about putting a prayer card. So it kind of evolved into people knowing that...
It doesn't need to evolve, does it?
The reason why I chose that seat was because there's lots of leg room, but also I could lean on an arm when I was standing up to make a speech. But, you know, I actually preferred that rather, like you, Marsha, rather than saying that I should have automatic rights, because I felt that I'd earned my seat by turning up every morning at 8 o'clock for 18 months almost.
You've earned your seat. As far as I'm concerned, you've earned your seat by winning an election and being here. The fact is that only a certain number of seats within that chamber actually suit your needs. And to me, I was going to ask Mary the kind of follow-up question of, we've talked a lot about people that have been incredibly supportive, whether it's the whips, whether it's Mr. Speaker, or some of the speakers have been really supportive, and the doorkeepers especially. Is there perhaps more that could be done with people that have not been particularly supportive or understanding of your needs, colleagues or other members of staff within the House, and what could that be?
It's a great question. I mean, I'd just come back on what Marsha and Robert have said. I do, you know, it's called equity. And that means that actually in certain circumstances you do need special treatment. I think the thing is, and certainly my slight nuance in this, and I'll come back to your bigger question, is very often as a disabled person you feel ashamed. You feel ashamed to be asking for more than what other people need or something different, and there are certain things which make you feel like you stand out. So I don't have a problem with special treatment, but I definitely regularly feel that sense of shame that I'm having to talk about my disability very publicly to people and raise these points because the anticipatory duty is just not embedded in the culture here. And so that, I think, goes to part of your question. That discretionary effort that the whips showed me, that others showed me at the beginning, that isn't the overall culture. And that anticipatory duty being embedded in the mindset of everybody that's working here, and senior people in the party and senior people in the House staff. You know, I've had a conversation, as I said in an article recently, I've had a conversation with 6 senior people about door handles. Now, I've done access and inclusion for nearly 2 decades. I don't want to have any more conversations about door handles. No. When I say the door handles are inaccessible, they're really heavy for people, whether you've got, you know, limb difference like me, and by the way, it's Limb Difference Awareness Month, so this is good timing, or whether it's because someone's got arthritis or whatever it may be. The cumulative impact on your energy levels, if you have to keep using those door handles, is exhausting. So there has to be a bit of trust for the knowledge and experience of disabled members. When they say something's a problem, it's a problem, and not need to repeat it again and again and again. And another example is dress code. So, you know, because I've got a prosthetic limb, I've also had so many surgeries on my legs. Like, I had to ask special permission to wear trainers in the summer. As it happens, I prefer wearing boots if I can find comfortable ones, so I have been. But to make yourself again singled out and to say you need to be able to wear trainers when people are walking miles and miles and miles like round this building, this inaccessible, beautiful older building, you know, that makes people feel uncomfortable. And there are colleagues that have got sensory issues, that are autistic, that find wearing ties really difficult and certain types of formal clothing really inaccessible and uncomfortable. So I did want to mention that point about dress codes.
I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
Shall I just bring in, sorry, I'm just conscious of time. No, it's fine, we've still got a bit of time, but Wendy wanted to come in, and I've got a few other areas we wanted to just bring.
Thanks, everybody. Certainly, this is, as always, prompting a good discussion and reflection. I'm just thinking about call lists and back to the time during COVID. Now, one of the reasons why I think call lists worked is because, actually, if you weren't getting in, you knew you weren't getting in, and you didn't waste your time. And I think one of the challenges we do have at the moment, and this is true whether you have a disability or not, is that we have got to a stage where so many people are trying to speak, which is good and positive, but the time constraints get tighter and tighter. You start giving the evil eye, frankly, to people who are intervening, because that's adding a minute, and it's not actually conducive to, if we accept, you know, Sarah, I think you're right, it is a debating chamber, so you want to have the opportunities to contribute. So my question is, would you be comfortable if call lists were something introduced, maybe Robert, to yourself, were introduced, that you would be comfortable that sometimes you didn't get to speak in the things you maybe wanted to speak in?
Of course I would, because that happens all the time anyway. So there's loads of times you put in and there were debates you'd think you automatically going to get called and you didn't. So I don't have a problem. I just want to know
the certainty. The certainty. Steve, did you want to come in on that?
It was just steps backwards, because on the bobbing and that, which it isn't an issue for me. It was more the calling to speak. Really happy that the speakers have kind of adopted a protocol where they will alert me just prior to me speaking that, you know, it's John Jones and then I'll be calling Steve Darling, and I do that at Westminster Hall as well. But I'm not convinced that it is part of their standard operating procedure, so I always have to get a colleague to go and double check that is the case. The other bit I was really keen to get over is the coughing when you're talking too long. Now, it happened to me today where I was putting my urgent questions, and I heard a cough, and I thought, oh, I'm taking too long. It's the speaker coughing at me. And it was just a colleague coughing, but in the moment, because I don't read from notes, I'm working from memory.
I think that's amazing. I watch you.
Then you know, I'm there thinking, need to truncate the rest of it quick and then kill the killer point I was wanting to do at the end. So an alternative route to coughing, because it's happened to me a couple of times now, I've realised that I thought it was that speaker. However, I must say the speaker has been really helpful, and when I had two speeches to make in quick succession, and remembering two different speeches for the same afternoon is just not going to happen for me. So they did permit me to leave the chamber, sit with a colleague nearby, and refresh populate the skeleton of the speech I knew I was going to make for the second one, so I could then do it. So, hats off to them for that flexibility they allowed. But and it is knowing when are you going to be, and I just echo that stuff. Even if I had a mobile annunciator, it's hopeless to me. So it is doing those adjustments where you're asking a colleague, like was just being said, where let me know when it's 1 minute, 20 seconds, and so forth. So it is that support from colleagues as well, which most people are here. Most people are good people in Parliament, and they're keen to support colleagues. So it's not too much of a pressure. But it is managing that chamber stuff is a challenge at times.
You memorise all your speeches, do you? Basically,
but
amazing.
I just have to. But I haven't got a clue about the time as well. Is something to be alive to.
Maybe a timer because you can't see the timer on the.
I think the secret of what I do, I always practice this. Well, practice, and then with a colleague outside. It's when it changes from 6 minutes to 3 minutes that then you think, what do I throw over the side? But that's the nature of the beach.
Very briefly, because I've got 2 or 3 other areas I just want to...
just on that, I think definitely, basically there needs to be a message to take home, which is audio describes stuff more. We need the speakers to do that. But in terms of speech lengths, I think that should be determined at the beginning, and sometimes initial 4 to 8 speakers are given a much longer length of time, and actually you don't need that time. It would be much better to fit more people in, and that there's that predictability, because if you've got an SBLD, or if you've got a sight impairment, or as Stephen's described, you can't sit there and rewrite your speech very easily. That's not a very inclusive thing to have to do. And yes, a lot of us have to think on our feet, of course we do. The other bit that I just want to mention in terms of intervention, which picks up on Stephen's point as well, is I was making a speech and somebody wanted to intervene on me, but I couldn't see who it was. So I didn't know if it was going to be a supportive or an aggressive intervention. As it was going to be someone that was going to be helpful and would have given me more time. But it would be useful to have a bit of an audio describe of who's trying to intervene on you, because I think colleagues might want to take an intervention from colleagues from certain parts of the House, but not others at certain points, and that often matters in terms of how long you've got to speak.
And just very briefly, I find it really difficult to intervene on others when there's some distance from me, because you're just not sure, what's quite going on around you. Whereas if they're next door to me, easy.
Yeah, no, they're all really, really good points. And look, on the call list issue, which I'm personally very in favour of, committee's not come to a view yet, but the procedure committee is actually doing a big inquiry on that at the moment. So I will make sure that the chair and clerk of that committee got a full transcript of some of your contributions on call lists as well. I think that would be very useful. And if you've not put into their call for views, I would strongly encourage you to do so, and perhaps it might be worth that committee hearing from some of your experiences as well. We're going to slightly change tack a little. Chris, you just wanted to ask about R&R, I think. And some
so sort of moving on from the chamber, I suppose a practical question about the lobbies, and I'll leave it there and let you answer it. But 2 sort of follow-up questions from the evidence that you've given so far. One is around restoration and renewal. Robert, I think this was started before you entered the House, and so that's a good chunk of time. We're looking at decisions being in a couple of years moving forward, with decisions possibly next year or the year after. I'd like to understand what your view is on restoration and renewal, and whether or not these delays are just acceptable to you as members with disabilities. And then just, Marie, on your very last point then you said about fitting more people in with time limits. My personal view, and this comes from for years and years have been on the procedure committee, was the previous deputy speakers, the 3 previous deputies, advocated that actually a far better way to manage the House would be to set a lower limit on speeches of of no less than 5 minutes, so that speeches could be more fuller and not just for a clip or whatever it might be. So I'd just be curious to know if that's actually a better way forward, rather than saying actually everyone gets 3 minutes to get everybody in. I'm not saying that's what you meant, but just taking it as an example.
Absolutely.
Rather than saying actually there's 40 speakers, but it's 5 minutes apiece,
so only 20
and therefore only 20 get in. End of discussion. Because obviously the response to that is, speaking as a whip rather than maybe as an MP for a second, if those 2 things are separate, the abuse you receive, and it is, abuse from colleagues who then criticise you for that timing mechanism, where I think actually it's better to be up front from the start and say everyone's getting 5 minutes.
So that's really, if I might, that's really what I meant.
Yes, no, I think that's what you meant. Look, I'm really conscious of time, so what I'm going to just suggest is, I think perhaps if people just say some of their reflections about the voting lobbies and the lobbies and the sort of moving around all of that much. Marsha, and then perhaps come on to Marsha.
With the voting lobbies, again, I think we need some signage for ayes and noes. We kind of know it's left, right or whatever. The voting machine, so I remember those we had to give our names in the queue, and that was a challenge. But with the voting machines, as they stand, I can't see anything on those voting machines. I literally tap my card and I have to listen for the sound to know whether or not my vote has been counted. Now, if there's an instance where it's really loud in the lobby, which it usually is, rightly so, that makes it almost impossible for me. When I go to vote, now an incident took place recently, well, it's happened twice now, where I've been told I can't walk a certain way to vote, and I was stopped from going a certain way.
Yes, I was with you.
And told to use the steps.
Yeah.
Well, I can't use the steps to go down because Chris may or may not remember this. It was Bless Fangham that helped me, but I fell down those steps because I couldn't see the steps and it was, so I just can't use those steps. And so from that perspective, I just feel as though I was told the reasons why, but actually, you know, I shouldn't be restricted as to which route I can take to vote. I should be able to...
The whole thing about crossing the tellers and everything.
Yeah, I feel as though I should be able to walk and vote, which, you know, whichever way I need to, actually. And so it did leave a really bad taste, because frankly, we're all members of Parliament and we've all got to go and vote through whichever lobby we're told to vote in. And I should just be able to do that. And I shouldn't have to, you know, explain why I can't do that. And, you know, that for me needs good. I will say about remote and electronic voting, Robert will remember this and you guys will remember this as well. You know, there was a time when we were voting on our phones during COVID. So it can be done, you know, voting remotely. And I think there's something to think about down the line about how we could potentially incorporate accessible voting here.
Rob, do you want to add anything to that?
So I do get the...
Had your segue to sort of help you go around the voting.
But even with the segue, to go around 14 times, I mean, you said 10 times, we did Brexit 14, 15, 16, 17 times. And it's an insane system. And the hours and hours, and you are, even with the segue, you just get completely knocked out by the end of it. Though, to be fair, the whips off did say, sometimes you don't have to do it, because I said I just can't do it anymore. And then there was that system, the whips
nodding through.
Yeah, nodding through. But I didn't like to do it because I wanted to do the votes, because, you know, just to be part of it. But it was crazy. I do get the argument that you do meet ministers in the lobby and you can get petitions signed and EDM signed and backbench debates signed and all this sort of thing. It's very useful. The way I would solve this problem is I wouldn't do it on the phones, because then you won't have the interaction at all. Although I'm not against... What I would do is I would have, if you're having a lot of votes, I would have it all done at once on the card machine. Where it's not always possible, because you don't always know which amendments are going to be called, but a lot of times you do know there's going to be 14 votes. So why not just do it all together? And I would, so I think that would you're still going to the lobby, and if you're waiting for a minister or whoever to walk through, you can just wait at the exit for them or see them in the lobby. But it would just save an enormous amount of time, and you still get that interaction, as I think that is the best of both worlds. And that's the way I would do it. I do worry that if it's just done on a phone, you lose something about the interaction with the MPs.
It's also very hard to whip and make sure you've got people there.
Oh,
and,
exactly. Yeah.
You know, people perhaps are more likely to do something like when they're on the safety of their own
you don't,
and all of that. So from a whipping point of view, it's not great. But I think there is
there's compromises.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your compromise is a good one. It's something we've discussed again as a committee with clerks and others. There is a sort of hitherto kind of hidden a kind of system that could be used, that's in, I think, Erskine May or somewhere hidden, where once the view of the House is established, the Speaker can take subsequent votes by people standing in the chamber or by indication in the chamber, essentially. So once the view of the House is established, after which we did use in Brexit, I think, at some point.
You have deferred divisions where you sometimes vote 3 or 4 times.
So the deferred divisions, they come later. But I mean, to be honest, they have their challenges too. But we could make more use of those, and they're all good suggestions.
When you've got some big votes, just go in there, put your card in once, and then do it. Yeah.
Steve, did you want to...
Sorry, I'm afraid it was on deferred divisions.
Yes.
And going in there to vote, often I just have to fall on the kindness of strangers to assist me on voting there. And I would just say that it would be helpful if it was appropriate for a member of support staff to assist, for me to have the confidence that the helpful Labour whip really is voting the right way, that they're helping with on this occasion.
And what did you vote in the select committee chairs and all that? I mean, they are just like piles of ballot papers, aren't they? How difficult was that?
It was a bit challenging, to say the least, but again, kindness of strangers. So.
Just good. On that, I would add, so what they've done for me, so they've made the font slightly larger on the ballot papers, because I couldn't in previous elections when we had select committee chair elections, and so in 2019 and 2020 I had larger font ballot papers. So it can be done.
I'm conscious of time. I'm going to park the R&R if you don't mind, Chris, just because I think, and because I've got a couple of other points from Chris, Vince, and Marcus just keen to get in. Chris, did you want to?
No, it was only just very, very briefly.
the yet to be as good MP for Harlow. No.
Now your friends are, didn't you? Now your friends are.
No, I'm sure you will be one day.
It was generally just about constituency offices and just how much support it's provided, or how much support you're provided to set up your constituency offices, and whether they're
accessible and things like that.
Accessibility of those, really.
Marsha?
Yeah, so I was the challenge finding a constituency office in London was how to find an office in inner London that would meet the budget. That was the biggest challenge, I have to say, and I think that needs to be thought about. But when I did eventually find my office, I was very lucky in that it was in a fully accessible building.
Right.
So that was really useful, and it had security, it had a reception with security. So all of those things were fine and were already in place. So it did make it easier. I don't have a shopfront office. I actually have an office within a bigger building, which is, I think, better in terms of security as well.
Has anyone else had any sort of issues, or was that side of it not so much of a problem? It's more this building. Okay, Marcus, you wanted to?
I think a lot of the stuff around procedure has been touched on, but I think there was something that came up in our conversations with the speaker around the accessibility of language, some of it linked to tradition and maybe stuff that we need to be careful with. But and I know this also came up in our conversations at the PLP group that me and Sarah Coombs attended. Would any of you like to talk about the accessibility of the language and the procedure, and whether that's causing any barriers for people? I think that part of that conversation was led in the PLP meeting with some people who had neurodiversity issues.
I think the main things that came up are the stuff we've already mentioned on audio describing for those of us with sight impairments, but also for people with SPLDs and autism, following proceedings by it being described better by the speaker would help. There are some real issues in terms of bill committee and the way that the groupings works and the order paper of amendments work for people with autism and SPLDs and ADHD, because it's really hard to follow.
I think it's very hard for anyone to follow.
And so that's something that I'm really happy to come back in more detail. The only thing that I wanted to mention, because it's quite an important one and this came up in our discussions, is in terms of voting, I would love the reasons room to be called the reasonable adjustments room, and you could have you could have a no screen on one side and an I screen on the other, and you could station a whip in there, and those people that can't walk miles and miles and miles going round and round could just vote in that space. And if they want to be able to do a couple of the votes in person, so they get that atmosphere, they get to speak to ministers and Secretary of State, shadow ministers, whatever, great. But if they don't, because for a lot of our members who, for whatever reason, might struggle being in crowds, they might overheat, they might get really stressed as a result of that, or find it sensorially really difficult, having that space set up, which is a bit smaller, fewer people, is more accessible, I think would make a massive difference. And quickly, Chris, on your R&R, yes, the delay is having an impact. There is not a accessible toilet in the lobby at all. And so if you're going to walk from between PCH as a member, the nearest disabled toilet on the main route an MP would take in their day is the lower waiting hall. So we need a disabled toilet in the lobby.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Well, look, I mean, I think we could have had another hour, to be honest. Can I thank you all very much? I don't know if please do feel free to contact us, input anything that you might felt we've not covered today that you feel needs an airing, just send that in to us. We are seeing some colleagues from the Lords and others, and we may come back to you kind of as we sort of progress to make sure that what we recommend and some of the things that we say at the end reflect what you'd like to see. But can I thank you all very much indeed for coming, and particularly to Rob, who's come in for a special visit. Still coming back. And hopefully, have you still got the segue then? Or?
No, I gave it because they actually
took it back.
Said they were buying some more for other MPs. I don't know what's happening.
All right, not seen anyone use it.
It's called a roller scoot.
I use it on the scoot.
Thank you very much.